The National Director of Public Prosecutions in our country occupies a vital position in our democracy.
What we did as a panel was to check suitability of the candidates meeting the minimum requirements.
If we can have someone who is pro the public and someone who really abides by the law.
A candidate that is fair and has a good sense of the law.
I just really hope it's somebody that's honest and will see everybody equal and not have favoritism.
The NDPP must ensure that the National Prosecuting Authority exercises its functions without fear, favour, or prejudice.
Who will be the next NDPP? It's topical, and it starts right now. A very good evening to South Africa and those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is It's Topical. The selection of the next National Director of Public Prosecutions. Advocate Cyril Ramaphosa's term of office comes to an end at the end of next month. It is considered a vital position in our democracy, upholding the rule of law, contributing to ensuring the efficiency and integrity of law enforcement, all vital given the state of play. So there's understandably a lot of weight being placed on who gets the job, the top job. President Cyril Ramaphosa established a panel for the selection of the next National Director of Public Prosecutions. And you saw it play out in real time. The aim was to identify the next NDPP through an open and transparent process that reflects the importance of this vital position in our democracy. The NDPP must ensure that the National Prosecuting Authority exercises its function without fear, without favour or prejudice, and should not be beholden to any vested interest, whether in politics, whether in business and elsewhere, as part of the presidency statement when announcing the panel. Now, the president mandated the panel to call for nominations through an open and transparent manner, conduct shortlisting, interviews, ensure vetting of suitable candidates, and then submit the names of 3 suitable candidates with a detailed report on suitability of the individuals to the president for consideration. But not everybody's happy about the list of candidates for the top job. We will discuss. It leads us to the question of the week, and we're asking you, with Cyril Ramaphosa's tenure as the NPA at the NPA drawing to a close, what stands out as her legacy? And what gaps should the next NDPP urgently address? We'd love to know your thoughts at SABC News _TV. Let's walk. You're also opening up the lines 011 714 0677 7879 011 714 0677 7879. Easy number on your screen. Get calling. I want to take you live on air. Get your thoughts live on It's Topical Perspective coming up. Right, let's tee up the discussion for you, what we know and why it matters. Let's look at the appointment history of the National Director of Public Prosecutions. And straight away, this name, Menzi Simelane, jumps out at you, right? Was appointed as the NDPP back in 2009. So, you'll remember, though, that the case of the Democratic Alliance versus President of the Republic of South Africa, where the Constitutional Court found the decision of the then president in 2009, that decision taken in 2009 to appoint Menzi Simelane as the National Director of Public Prosecutions was inconsistent with the Constitution and invalid. But that didn't stop him from wanting the top job. Again, you saw the interviews again play out in real time. Now, to this, There are 6 candidates. The advisory panel for the selection of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa and chaired by the Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, concluded its 2-day interview process on Thursday. That was the 11th of December. Now, the panel comprised of leaders from key constitutional and legal institutions. The Ministry of Justice and Constitutional Development tells us that a total of 32 applications or nominations were received and assessed, with 6 candidates on your screen meeting the minimum requirements that led to them being interviewed. Take a listen to the President.
The National Director of Public Prosecutions in our country occupies a vital position in our democracy and makes an essential contribution to upholding the rule of law and ensuring the efficiency and the integrity of law enforcement.
Now, I wanted you to have a look at this. The panel was mandated to identify and interview individuals worthy of consideration for the appointment as the NDPP. Following the completion of the process, the panel undertook to submit its report to the President on Friday, the 12th of December, for his consideration. We will watch that space in terms of any developments there. Now, that in a nutshell sets up our discussion with our better minds coming up in a short while. But I want to go to your better mind. What do you have to say about all of this? The Word on the Street feature took to various streets of Johannesburg seeking diverse insights and perspectives on this topic, and this is what people had to say.
If we can have someone who is pro the public and someone who really abides by the law, someone who can really work towards, getting rid of corruption, then, we will have a good society.
A candidate that is fair and has a good sense of the law, and also that can help with the time management so that prosecutions don't take time to be resolved.
I just really hope it's somebody that's honest and will see everybody equal and not have favoritism, and just kind of treat everybody equally. And if somebody's in the wrong, even if he's higher up or he's got a lot of people following him, or I don't know, somebody that's well known, I just want everybody to be, the law to be the law.
I think they need a person who is aware, who is present in society, who isn't leading from a role of not being informed about what is actually happening in people's everyday lives, so that better informed decisions can be made.
Someone who's fair, someone who makes sure that all cases are properly gone through in thorough detail, someone who's anti-corrupt, someone who doesn't look at people who have been prosecuted based on their status or anything, but make sure that things go according to the law.
But we need someone who has great personal values, because that often reflects in the way that they do their job. So someone who stands for justice, someone who stands for fairness, equity. Simply put, we just need a good person in charge.
Really appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's get the discussion on the road. Remember that number, 011-714-0677-7879. We would love to hear from you on this topic. We have gathered some of the fine minds in South Africa to give us some perspective on this and to help us unpack it. Lawson Naidoo, Executive Secretary of the Council for the Advancement of the South African Constitution, or CASAC, as well as Dr. Llewellyn Kerr-Lewis, Senior Lecturer in the Faculty of Law, University of Pretoria. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. Lawson, to you first. 6 candidates interviewed. Who stands out?
Good evening, and thank you very much. I think before we get to that, it is concerning, as you mentioned in the introduction, that there were only 32 applicants or nominees in the first place. And one of the, whilst the process has been to a certain extent transparent, we don't know the detailed criteria by which candidates were evaluated and why the panel felt that only 6 candidates met the minimum requirements that put them forward for an interview. So that's a concern about that. And then when we look at the interviews themselves that were conducted, as we know, over 2 days last week, and they were quite lengthy interviews. But another issue that I think arises for me is also around the composition of the panel and the panel's understanding of exactly what the NPA does and what the role of the national director is. Because some of the questions were very general in nature and didn't really hone in on what I think are some of the key responsibilities of the job and the key challenges within the NPA. So I'm not sure that we've really come out of it with a clear picture of the 6 candidates and how they would approach the specific issues that face the NPA at this point in time. Having said that, I think certainly I think a lot of opinion, and it certainly seemed to be my panel and the way the panel interacted with candidates.
Yeah.
That Kolisile Kanyile and Hamian Cornier have probably emerged as the 2 front runners after those interviews.
What is the criteria, Dr. Kerr-Lewis? The NPA, or the National Prosecuting Authority Act, provides for the qualifications for the appointment of the NDP. And in addition to, I guess, possessing the requisite legal qualifications and being a South African citizen, the NDPP must be fit and proper. What does that mean? How is that measured?
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity, and from my side also welcome. And first of all, I have to agree wholeheartedly with the initial observations made by Lawson Naidu. I totally agree with those sentiments and also the concerns and the criticism raised by him, first of all, regarding the composition of the panel that interviewed let's call it the shortlisted candidates. And then second of all, also the 32, let's call it in CVs that was initially discussed and considered. Well, that being said, you asked the question, what is the requirements? Now, obviously, there are all the standard requirements that we'll typically find in the Constitution, that this person must have integrity, must have the necessary qualifications, and so forth and so on. But at the end of the day, the ultimate question is if this person is fit and proper. Now, fit and properness is always the criterion set out in our law for the highest positions on the judiciary. That includes judges, even legal practitioners when they are admitted, and obviously all these participants and candidates that we've seen on the shortlisted list actually fits that profile. Right. No problem with that at all. Well, that may be with the exception of Similani, which is currently under discussion because there are currently court cases reconsidering whether he is indeed fit and proper even to practice as an advocate itself. That being said, all the other candidates fit those profiles, but at the end of the day, surely that cannot be the only criterion for the most senior position in the NPA. I mean, each and every practitioner out there that actually initially fit the 32 shortlisted, or let's call it in CVs that were considered, must have been fit and proper in the first instance to be on that 32 panel or that 32 list in itself. So that is, as far as I'm concerned, a very broad and vague criteria to be considered.
Right.
It actually incorporates a number of things: value, constitutional principles, integrity, all those typical things that one would expect is self-explanatory for a person with this power and position in our law.
And correct me if I'm wrong. Now, one of the legal requirements of the NDPP is that the relevant individual must have the right of appearance in any court in South Africa, correct? Is that correct? Just break that down first. And does that rule out anyone on the so-called shortlist?
Yes, that is correct. Well, that was one of my first initial criticisms against our previous National Director of Public Prosecutions, the fact that we hardly ever saw in court cases appearing herself. I mean, if you want to be the leader of such an esteemed department and let's call it entity, you must lead by example and be willing and able to take on the biggest cases yourself and stand in court and show the rest of your personnel and understudies how to go about in prosecuting. But that being said, all these candidates fit the requirement of appearance in the High Court. I mean, the criterion set by the Legal Practice Act entails that you must have an LLB degree and 3 years post admission if you are an attorney. If you are an advocate, then obviously there's a bit of a slightly different approach. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is all these candidates are senior enough, and I will be very hesitant to say that any one of them have not right of appearance. So at least that requirement has been met.
Management experience, Lawson, and litigation experience. How do you weigh the two in terms of the next NDPP and what's important here?
Well, I think the critical issue is management experience. And, this was one of the issues that was introduced because it's not in the Constitution nor in the legislation. But the panel introduced this criteria that of a minimum of 10 years of executive management experience in order to qualify or to move to the next stage. Why it should be 10 years, I don't know. And the concern for me with that is there are probably very few lawyers, practicing advocates, or even attorneys who have that kind of management experience. They often practice advocates as sole proprietors, attorneys in firms where the management responsibilities are not that huge. So that's a concern, although, as I say, leadership is an important factor. And to come to the point that was just made, I don't think it's necessary for the National Director to appear in court and actually prosecute cases. They're running a large and complex organization with many thousands of staff. And that's the primary function, is to ensure that the institution functions efficiently and effectively. And that's making sure you have the right people to do the job, that you have the right resources. And that's the real job of the National Director, to do those things. Having said that, and maybe we'll get onto this in a moment, but the institutional constraints that face the NPA at the moment, whilst at the functional level in terms of its prosecutorial decision-making, there is no suggestion that it is not independent and does not act without fear, favour or prejudice, despite some of the allegations that there may be elements of corruption amongst some prosecutors.
Right.
It's the operational and financial independence of the NPA that I think is the big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed by the incoming National Director.
We'll get to the issue of staffing, resources, etc. in a short while. The DA says if the president goes ahead and appoints anyone from the panel's recommendations, they will approach the court to interdict that appointment. How do you see this playing out, Lawson? Is it likely to get messy?
Well, the DA's position was premised on the issue that Dr. Carl Lewis has already raised, that is the inclusion of Menzi Simelane amongst the 6 that were interviewed. He should have been disqualified from the outset based on the fact that he was removed from office following a decision of the Constitutional Court in 2012, which called into question his integrity and fitness to hold office. I certainly, to a certain extent, agree that his inclusion has tainted the whole process and undermined the integrity of the process, as well as, to a certain extent, I would say, the credibility of the panel itself. Although during the course of Mr. Simelane's interview on Thursday, it became apparent that there were serious concerns amongst the panelists around his integrity and honesty. And, that begs the question of how he got that far. So I don't anticipate seeing Mr. Simelane's name on the shortlist that has been presented to the president. But if it has, then I think litigation may well be in the offing.
Dr. Carl Lewis, we need to take a break, but I just want to leave on this note before that break. Is it, could the president go in a completely different direction at this stage? Could he just say, okay, those are the 6 candidates, I think otherwise? What's your thoughts?
Well, I'm sure the state president has the final say in the appointment of the National Director of Public Prosecutions, but in itself, this will create an issue because be mindful of the fact that it was on his instructions that this panel was constituted in the first instance. One must always remember that if you appoint a panel to recommend and then you deviate from their recommendation, then that in itself might be the subject of a review application later on by any person or institution that doesn't find favor with whatever outcome you then propose. So Lawson is quite correct when you observe that this will in itself, besides the fact that if Samilane is one of those three candidates that is recommended, that will in itself end up in court. If you ask me, I have no doubt about that. But the same will go if the state president deviates from the recommendation of the three names ultimately provided to him. So I have no doubt in my mind that in order to prohibit further litigation on this issue, President Ramaphosa will be very unlikely not to follow in the appointment of one of the three candidates ultimately provided to him.
011-714-0677-7879. That's the number to dial. Get dialing. I want to take your calls live on air. Your thoughts with regards to the whole process, the interview, panel, etc. How did we get to this stage? I also want to touch on the legacy being left by the outgoing NDPP, Advocate Shamila Batohi, as she leaves at the end of next month. What have we learned? What sort of challenges do we still face as a country concerning the National Director of Public Prosecutions? More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. The question of the week we're asking you, with Shamila Batohi's tenure at the NPA drawing to a close, what stands out as her legacy and what gap should the next NDPP urgently address? At SABC News_TV, we're also on Facebook. We've got a couple of Facebook posts as well responding to our question. Let's put it up, see what you have to say in this regard. Let's hear from Nombi Kelelo, saying that she failed dismally. Next person should start from scratch. But looking at the candidates that were interviewed, I have little hope. Maybe the two I didn't hear did well. Budvuyo says withdrawing charges against the SARS rogue unit and reducing to prosecute the Palapala matter will always stand out for me. And I think we have time for just one more. Missy Hesse says she was headhunted because of her record. I'm disappointed that she did not achieve what she set out to do. We appreciate your thoughts on the matter. Let's put it to the panel as well. Legacy that is being left by Advocate Shamila Batohi. Lawson, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the last comment you read out was an important one because Advocate Batohi, I think, was looked at the time because although she'd had a long history in the NPA, she had left the organization in the late 2000s and been away for 10 years, and I think it was necessary at that time to bring in someone from outside, as it were, given the fact of what had happened during the state capture era, the hollowing out of the NPA. The many NDPPs that we had, as you showed in the visual you showed earlier, all of the NDPPs, and all of them being removed in rather controversial circumstances. Advocate Batohi is the first NDPP to see out her full term, albeit that she will have served only 7 of the 10 years and will be leaving office on the basis of reaching the compulsory retirement age. I think the one point I would make is that the NPA is certainly in a better place now than it was when she took over in February of 2019. The question, though, has to be: could she have done more? Could she have achieved more in the time that she's been there? There has been progress. Many of us will lament the fact that there hasn't been more progress. In particular, I think there's been a focus on the lack of or not as many state capture and corruption prosecutions as we would like to see. But behind the scenes, there have been consistent efforts to rehabilitate the institution, to recruit more prosecutors, to bring back the aspirant prosecutors program, to secure more funding from the fiscus for the NPA, to have the IDAC established now as a permanent entity.
Right.
These were issues that took up a lot of time during her tenure. But we'll still have to see, perhaps in a year or two, when we look back with hindsight and compare it to how her successor has progressed, to see exactly how well or how badly she did.
Advocate Batohi said that the word she used during her interview for the position where the NPA is akin to a house on fire, Dr. Kerr-Lewis. To what extent has she been able to douse those flames?
Once again, I wholeheartedly agree with my colleague Lawson on this issue. Shamila Batohi retires at the end of January 2026 after serving 7 years of what's supposed to be a 10-year term. But at least this time around, we saw her seeing the tenure of office end out. That is way better than any of her predecessors the last decade or two. That being said, you asked from the beginning, so what legacy will she leave? My question is there any legacy that we can talk of whatsoever? We haven't seen things really getting better. In actual fact, the latest comments of the public, if you ask me, and it was clear from the comments that we saw on the screen as well, that the public feels that nothing have happened during her tenure. She drifted away basically unnoticed over the last 7 years, and they were not mentioning any results whatsoever that we can discuss, actually, worthwhile to mention here. Yes, obviously, once every now and then there was a light at the end of the tunnel, but the fact of the matter is the NPA is captured. And we need a clean slate. We need an overhaul of the National Prosecuting Authority. And I'm afraid that the current candidates that we have identified on the short list, I'm not sure that they will bring that new perspective to the foreground. The only possible candidates that might qualify to do that is Cronje and Kanyile, because they offer reformist and the credibility from outside. But then in itself, that will create another problem because, remember, they will sit with internal issues that they are not used to or not familiar with. So all in all, we will have a lot of new nuances in this matter that I'm sure we should have foreseen when we shortlisted the candidates. And I'm not sure we have to necessarily expedite the appointment of the NP, National Prosecuting Authority, just for the sake of it. Let's rather take our time and maybe, if needs be, reconsider and even expand her appointment for another month or two to give us ample opportunity to properly consider and get the correct appointment here.
Lawson, conviction rates under her watch. And look, the criticism will come with regards to these high-profile cases, right? That's what tends to stick in the public's minds. You have the Gupta brothers, the alleged state capture issues, the Nulani Investments 25 million rand fraud case, the Shepard Bushiri case, asbestos, etc. Talk to us about her track record, especially with regards to state capture cases.
Perhaps the first point to make is, conviction rates are not necessarily the best measure of the performance of the National Prosecuting Authority. I think we must avoid looking at the NPA in a vacuum or in a silo. It is part of the criminal justice system of the law enforcement agencies that we have. It starts with, a complaint being laid at the police station, investigations by the police before a docket is produced that is taken to the NPA for prosecution. I think this was an issue that was well canvassed during the interviews last week in terms of how long it takes for some of those processes to take, and examples given, for example, in sexual offences matters where complainants decide to withdraw their testimony at the last minute and so on. So I think, one can look at conviction rates, but I don't think they tell us very much. I think the issues you've raised are important ones, but we tend to overlook the fact that whilst we focus on the so-called failures of the NPA, we don't celebrate the successes in quite the same way. I mean, the fact is that the asset forfeiture unit in the NPA has frozen several billions rands worth of assets of people implicated in corruption and state capture. We have a former Speaker of the National Assembly, a former Minister of Finance who are facing charges related to corruption and state capture. That's something that I think we should be proud of, because there are not many countries in the world where that happens. And yes, I would absolutely agree that more should be done. More people should be in court already. But I think the point is that the groundwork is being done, and it's taken a long time. We talk about capacity or the lack of skills, which Advocate Hermione Cronier highlighted in her interview last week. That's not something new. We've known that for a very long time, because, as I said, the NPA was hollowed out during state capture. A lot of the good prosecutors left at that time, and it takes a long time to upskill new entrants into the NPA to the level of being able to prosecute complex commercial crime cases and state capture cases. So this is a work in progress, and I think one must hope that now that the IDAC is a permanent institution and is able to recruit more aggressively in the market, that they will bring in the capacity that helps to fast track prosecutions.
In July this year, the presidency released a statement on the progress made in terms of implementing state capture commission recommendations. And I just want to read it out for the viewers so we get a sense of where we are at this stage. And this is what it read. The integrated task force led by the National Prosecuting Authority is actively implementing 218 criminal investigation recommendations across multiple state capture focus areas. And as of March 2025, 21% of these cases were either finalized or enrolled for trial. Just over half were under active investigation. Several high-profile cases are scheduled for trial during the 2025-2026 year, including the matters, the Free State Asbestos removal case, SA Express, Bosasa-related cases, and Transnet contracts. So that's, in a nutshell, what the president told us in July. 4 state capture-related cases have already concluded with guilty verdicts. Dr. Kerr-Lewis, these are complicated cases, often. The state capture cases, our expectations as the public. Do you think it's reasonable given the complexity of these cases?
Well, let me first start to say the following. One person cannot change a system. And once again, I agree with Lawson in this regard. We might be a bit unfair towards Shamila Batohi to expect her to change a whole system in a tenure of only 7 years. It is work in progress, definitely, and well done for those successful prosecutions that you've mentioned, indeed. From the state president's perspective, obviously he wants to see results because that's good for politics. I mean, we must be, in no uncertain terms, also say to one another, we are on the brink of elections next year on provincial level and municipal elections. So it will be counting in the favor of the government if they can prove results. Remember, we have spent a lot of taxpayers' money on all kinds of commissions of inquiry, which in essence went nowhere, if you ask me. Right. To make recommendations is one thing. To implement them is another thing. And then obviously to get final results mean seeing people in orange overalls in jail. That is the final result which we all want to see happening. But if matters of this nature takes years, and it does take years, then it's not as simple as it sounds. Yeah. I mean, the police, the resources, the courts, all these institutions are understaffed and underfinanced. And in order to get a successful conviction, one cannot only rely on the prosecutor in court. Right. It is a united effort that needs to be introduced in order to secure ultimately successful prosecutions. And sometimes, unfortunately, it takes even years. We've seen a prosecution of former State President Zuma that has been on our court roll for the best part of 15 or more years. So that's one example. And we can mention so many others. Our court rolls are overburdened. Trial rolls are set for future dates, that's months, if not years in advance. That is untenable. We cannot see our justice system moving forward under these conditions. So I do agree we must obviously be fair towards the NPA in this regard. And I totally agree. If anything is to be said, it is to support her with resources.
Right.
And that starts at the ground level, which is the SAPS.
During an interview, Hermione Cornea Lawson said that we have a crisis in terms of postponements and delays. Agree?
I'm not sure I would necessarily agree with the description of a crisis, that there are problems with some of them. But as again, Dr. Carlos has said, these complex investigations take a long time, and we sometimes, are very quick to point the finger of blame. But if one looks, for example, at other jurisdictions internationally, it takes an a long time to prove cases such as these. They take, many years. So we're not unique in that regard. The fact that we demand accountability is important and needs to be there. But these are complex cases. They do take a long time. And has the NPA made mistakes? Absolutely, they did. I think it's been acknowledged that, for example, they enrolled the Machela Coco case too early. They were not ready. It then got struck off, and they're now back to the drawing board on that. The other one you mentioned earlier, the Nulani case that was dismissed or thrown out of court, the NPA won on appeal. So this is the nature of our legal system. But the fact is, we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have enough courts. The courts that we do have are not well enough equipped. So we need more courts, we need more judges, so that we can get the court rolls to move more speedily as well. So matters, don't get set down for a hearing in a year or two's time. So and again, this is the point, that it's not just about the NPA, it's about the whole of the criminal justice system. And this is where government has got to come forward and assist in that regard and make those resources available. If we're serious about bringing down levels of rampant crime in the country, tackling corruption effectively, and prosecuting those implicated in state capture, then those are some of the things that need to be done. And that's why I said earlier, the issue around the operational and financial independence of the NPA is something that's going to be high on the list of priorities for the incoming NDPP. There have been political commitments from both the President and the Minister of Justice that will be forthcoming, but several years after those commitments were made, we've yet to see legislation emerge to that effect. And that'll probably take another year or two at the very least before we have an NPA that is constitutionally clothed with the powers that it requires in order to do what it needs to do.
Right, we need to take a quick break. The big umbrella question we ask you is the NPA fit for purpose in order to bring justice to the people of South Africa? With Shamila Batohi leaving soon, a tenure at the NPA drawing to a close, what stands out as her legacy, and what gaps should the next NDPP urgently address? More next. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. We're talking legacy in terms of the NPA, or the National Director of Public Prosecution. We're also talking the way forward, succession as well. What sort of challenges face the new NDPP? We asked you to send us your comments. Let's put up some of them and the answers to this question. With Shamila Batohi's tenure at the NPA drawing to a close, what stands out for you in terms of a legacy? What sort of gaps should the next NDPP urgently address? Let's take a look at some of your comments coming through from Facebook. David says her legacy will be remembered for all the cases the NPA lost during her tenure. Senzo, he or she must not be quiet like her. This madam was very good. Swaran says she needed more time in her tenure to catch up on the case files. Appreciate your thoughts. At SABC News_TV is where we're at. Let me go to Dr. Kerr Lewis. The NPA can only succeed if its most important resources, which is its staff, is engaged, is motivated, is committed. Looking in from outside, do you think that is the case? How far are we from that optimum?
Yes, you're quite correct. One must understand that Jamila Batohi had a number, almost 1,000 personnel, if not more, under her direct supervision. And the future National Director of Public Prosecution will also be faced with similar, let's call it then, issues with personnel. That being said, I would like to refer you to Hermione Cronje. She was the former ID head, and she resigned some years ago from the IE amid frustrations with the NPA structures, and that includes the personnel and all the internal conflict that came to the fore.
Yeah.
And that being said, so the criticism was already aired by someone like herself some years ago, and the question that arose at that stage already was the ability to manage the entrenched bureaucracy that we have faced in the NPA.
Right.
Now, if that is so, make no mistake that whoever takes over from Jamila Batohi will also have to deal with that. And that brings us back to the initial comment. I think Lawson mentioned it earlier on as well. The leadership role and the management role that will be faced. We cannot steer away from that. And that will be in itself one of the biggest obstacles that will be facing the new incoming National Director of Public Prosecutions.
Something else Hermione Cronje said, Lawson, was an organization like the NPA will never be free from attempts of capture. I wonder what sort of guardrails should be put up in order to protect the next NDPP from this.
Yeah, well, clearly the leadership tone set by the national director and the rest of the leadership of the NPA, it's not a one-person organization. There are many thousands of prosecutors across the country. I think to a large extent, the top leadership of the NPA, are independent, do pursue their responsibilities without fear, favour, or prejudice, and seek to do the best. But where people go astray, the powers of the national director to institute disciplinary action, for example, against the senior management is almost non-existent. Those powers reside with the president rather than with the national director. This is something that's got to change, in that, it's not just the national director that is appointed by the president. All four of the deputy national directors, as well as each of the 9 directors of public prosecutions in each of the provinces, are also appointed by the president. And this is something that needs to be done more closely, in more close alignment with the national director, so we get the right kinds of people there. So this is an opportunity now. We're not just appointing a new national director, but all 4 deputy national directors positions will come up. Some are vacant already, at least 2. 2 more will become vacant, I believe, quite soon. There are a number of DPPs in the provinces whose tenure will be ending in the next year or 2. So there's an opportunity for a new cohort of leadership in the NPA to be brought in. That's an opportunity that should not be missed. And, we need to ensure that the right people are brought in with the requisite robustness and independence to withstand the kinds of influence that come from outside. And it's not just political influence, which we see on a regular basis. We've seen attacks on the NPA, unsubstantiated attacks on the NPA in recent times, for example, from certain political parties who fear that some of their members or leaders might face the wrath of the NPA at any time. But influence comes in many other forms, and we've been hearing some of this through what's come out, for example, at the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry.
Correct.
But we need a cohort of people in the NPA, and I think the vast majority of them fit that bill of not being susceptible to external influence. But that's got to be something that is instilled deeply across the whole of the organization.
Right. Public trust is going to be so key, not only in the NPA, but the criminal justice system as a whole. And you've seen what's been coming out from the Madlanga Commission as well. But I wonder, and I guess, Dr. Curlewis, this might be a very difficult line to straddle with regards to communicating your strategy as the NPA to the public. Do you think, and it lends itself to transparency, etc. Do you think the NPA needs to better communicate what they're getting up to, communicate their strategy in terms of state capture, in terms of fighting GBV, etc.?
Yes, I do think so. I mean, we are living in a technological age where everything is immediately available for everybody to read, to see, and to listen and to address on social media and so on. So maybe that is a very good starting point to ensure that your image is portrayed in a better light than we've seen before. Results. People want to see results. The members of the public wants to see exactly that. It's one thing to have qualifications, but ultimately the test is the high water mark is your performance. And that must be displayed and must be communicated to the members of the public, that we can not only see the negative criticism that is sometimes in our news, in our social media, but also the results, the good results that Lawson also mentioned earlier on. Once we have that, then we can have a balanced approach and we can say, listen, now we can obviously compare apples with apples and see what the good and the bad was during a person's tenure. And surely we will always have that influence from political parties that is not satisfied and that is easily going to criticize whatever is available out there. And I will not be surprised that whoever is appointed will start off exactly on that footing.
Yeah.
And that person will have to make it his or hers first objective to ensure that the image of the National Prosecuting Authority will be raised to a level that is acceptable and in accordance to the constitutional principles and values of our Constitution.
Yeah.
So I totally agree with your observation.
It's a crucial time in South Africa's history, given what we're dealing with, the state of play in terms of the criminal justice system. Qualifications, Lawson, is one thing. But what else do you think the president will be factoring in when he's making his choice regarding the new National Director of Public Prosecutions in order to achieve that public trust?
Well, he should be looking for someone, that is robustly independent, that has the gravitas to take on a very demanding job. This is not just the chief prosecutor of the country, but the person that's running in the president's own words, one of the most critical institutions in our constitutional democracy. So you want somebody who's fiercely independent, who's passionate about rooting out crime and corruption in South Africa, is committed to leading an ethical team of prosecutors, and who exercises their functions without fear, favour, or prejudice. They've got to be, the integrity has got to be totally unimpeachable. All of those things we spoke earlier about. What does fitness and fit and proper mean? Yeah. Well, it's not just a standard one-size-fits-all thing. It's fit and proper to be entrusted with the responsibilities of a particular office. This is an incredibly demanding office and needs a person who really stands out, if you like. And that, I think, is what the president should be looking for. The question is he going to find it in any of these 6 candidates or the 3 that are recommended to him? And coming back to the point made earlier, if the president is not happy with that, what happens then?
Yeah.
I don't think he should just pick someone else from left field, but perhaps should refer the matter back to the panel. It's happened before with interviews for judges from the Judicial Service Commission, where it's been sent back to that body to relook at it. Mm-hmm. So I think the president has really got to be very clear here. If he's not happy with that, the people proposed don't meet the criteria that he believes are necessary, then he can do that. Because this is a tall order. It's a tough ask, particularly in these circumstances, and facing the kind of crises that we do. What's going to restore public trust? A lot of the stuff we've spoken about is sort of behind the scenes, for which the NPA doesn't get credit. But ultimately, in order to win that public trust, they're going to have to successfully prosecute people for state capture and high-level corruption.
Right.
That's the issue that's really going to restore public trust in this institution, and the NPA needs to be focused on that, as well as prosecuting the thousands of cases that come before our magistrates and regional courts every day.
Right. Dr. Curlewis, it seems that time is of the essence. The incumbent leaves at the end of next month. We've just only finished the interviews with regards to the 6. The new person will need about, a month or so to get up to speed. Have we left it too late in terms of this process? What's the options here that is left for the president? Do you see Shamila Batohi staying a little longer?
Well, first of all, I think I mentioned it earlier on. I hope so. I am also convinced that we have rushed into this process and maybe left it until the last minute. And I am concerned that we have expedited unnecessary in order just to satisfy the requirements set out by President Ramaphosa for a start. So, yes, if needs be, we must rather take our time and ensure that the right person is appointed. Correctly pointed out once again, integrity, credibility, ethical principles, those are the things to aspire, and that is the person we want, because that will set out the tone for a leader going forward in this process. But once again, I was concerned initially when I saw within the auspices of almost a month, maybe 2 months at best, we've started and almost finished the whole process regarding the appointment and recommendation, at least of these people to be considered. Now, President Ramaphosa will be well within his power to sit back and take his time, and then maybe once again reconsider maybe extending the tenure of Shamila Batohi, even if it's for another month or 2 or 3, to ensure that the right person is appointed. So I totally agree with that sentiment as well. That being said, for the new person to come in and to automatically assume that within a month or 2 that person will be up to speed with everything that needs to be considered for that post, I think that is a bit of an imagination, figment of our imagination. That will take the best part of a year or 2 to settle down and to get to grips with that position and office. Fortunately, we have institutional knowledge in some of these candidates that have been shortlisted.
Right.
But let's say the person that is appointed is not one of the current personnel of the NPA, one of the so-called outsiders, if you'd like. And here I'm thinking about Kanyile and maybe Cronje as 2 possibilities. Then it will take more than a month or 2 for that person to settle down and to get to grips with the office as such.
Lawson, final word to you. How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the process has been rushed. We have to acknowledge that. The president only established the panel 2 months ago at the beginning of October. Yet the president knew the day that he appointed Shamila Batohi that she would have to retire at the end of January of 2026. Why did he leave it until the last minute to put this panel in place? The process has been rushed. There was only a week given for public comments on the 6 candidates. There was huge public interest in this process, as you can see from the messages you've played here, from the people you spoke to on the streets of Johannesburg. The panel received 281 comments in that 1 week. If that had been a longer period, I'm sure there would have been greater public interest and involvement in this process. So I think it was unnecessarily rushed, and I think the president must really now look and say, if he's not satisfied, what are his options? I disagree, Dr. Kalos. I don't think the president has the discretion to extend Advocate Batohi's tenure. The Concourt was quite clear in that in the case that removed a former NDPP, Sean Abrams, from office. But he could certainly appoint an acting NDPP. We've had many of those in the past for a few months, in order to get this process right. Because you're making an appointment of someone who's potentially going to be in office for 10 years.
Yes.
You've got to get it right. And the president owes us, at the very least, that he takes this seriously enough to really apply his mind. And if he's not happy, to actually go back to the drawing board.
Yep. We'll see how it plays out. Thank you so much indeed, gentlemen. Dr. Llewellyn Kalos as well as Lawson Naidu. We will watch the space to see how all of this comes to a head when Shamila Batohi finally leaves at the end of next month. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for your time. All right, before we go, here's my take. 3 words for me, right? Accountability, transparency, and efficiency. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Crime takes a huge toll on its victims, be it physical, emotional, even financial. And you'd expect prosecution of those responsible for unashamedly stealing from you, who hurt your family, who hurt this country. Those expectations are not unreasonable. Accountability. Who will pick up their hand and make sure that they exercise their function without fear, favor, or prejudice? And the dictum, justice must not only be done, but must also be seen to be done. It rings true, right? It lends legitimacy or veracity to the fight against crime. It strengthens trust and confidence in the justice system. That's the transparency part. Efficiency, for me, is multi-pronged. And I would argue it's a collective effort involving the entire criminal justice system, as well as you and me, right? Treating the source rather than being fixated on the symptom. Taking a deeper dive into cases of corruption and the responsibility we have as citizens in speaking out and helping strengthen cases that eventually land up in court. The aspect of moral responsibility in the name of progress. Strong civil participation is key. As one author puts it, try a crime, you end a criminal. Treat the environment, you end crime. Accountability, transparency, and efficiency. And that's my take. If you miss anything on this program, then be sure to watch this episode of Topical on YouTube. Unwrap Africa up next with Tembekile. Until next week, my brothers and sisters, take care. Bye-bye.